Hey there, guys. Back outside. There's birdies shouting at me, probably or shouting at each other, more like. I don't think they care that I'm here. And there's cats walking back and forth because it's going on 3:30. They get their dinners around, what is it, 5:30? So it's high time for them to get nervous about that. So I've been wanting to do this VR to Natalia at Ouroboros, her channel, about the tarot binge phenomenon. I will put the link to her video in the description to this one, so you can have a look at that, because I think she started it, this discussion, or this interesting question. It's a thing. I have really enjoyed her video. I've just watched it again for the second time. And it's like I've only really got a couple of little points to add to her analysis of the situation. I'd like to share also what my experiences have been, regarding my collection, how I look at my cards, my different decks that I own to some extent, and all that. So I don't think I've necessarily binged ever, because I'm supposed to be too sensible for that, and I don't have the money, basically. So I have to make choices, make decisions. We tend to, nowadays, my husband and I are both interested in tarot and oracle decks, but we are really, really selective in what we really want to own, basically. Sometimes I think it would be nice to have a library of decks that you could, which it won't work, I know. I'm just saying, it would be nice if you could order or have a loan of a deck for a month or so, just like an ordinary library, and you could just try the imagery out for yourself and see whether you have any vibes with it, and then go from there. Then you can always get it for yourself if you want to. It doesn't really work that way, of course. If you want to hold a deck in your hands and fiddle with it for any length of time, means you have to buy it, really, on a very practical level. That's already something. I think that's a factor that influences. So I'm just gonna, share my thoughts here and some of my experiences. And there's a leaf. I had a free last season's wisteria leaf that fell down. So yeah. So I don't think I've ever really binged that much. I have had phases where I would print out the collection of images, if that was possible, in one way or another, either from photographs on the internet or through websites that share actual, files of card images. Print those out for myself, work with that. I have recently done an Indonesian tarot in that way. Printed them out, glued them on cardboard, and that's a whole ball game to get a really 78 card tarot deck complete that way. Basically, I think I've only done that for tarot, not for oracle decks so much. I don't own that many oracle decks, and I think one reason for that is that so my personal life has always been rather, dramatic and intense, and I'm also an artist myself, so I draw and paint quite a bit, and I have made some attempts at oracle cards for myself that I am still, basically actually still working on, and that I'm very fond of. And a lot of the symbols and images in those cards are really personal, and that's what I'm used to, and that's what I've always worked with for all my life. So I tend to not respond very well to, let's say, for example, angel oracles and those animal oracle decks are better than angels, but it still, it doesn't really come home to me as much as the imagery that I tend to think up for myself. You know, it's just a way, the way I am really. So hence the focus on, as far as making my own little decks goes, the focus on tarot to that extent. It's not really that I actually prefer tarot that much. I use them together often, and that works really fine. I have made, for example, a mini version of a Sassurabito tarot, the cards are about yay big, so that's like postage stamp size, right? And I have an oracle card set, that's the Awakened Soul Oracle that are made there, and they're this big, so they're about twice the size of the other ones. I actually ordered the Sassurabito reel from Stasha Burrington on Etsy. Was that yesterday or the day before? Just recently. And it's coming. It's on its way towards us. So yay that, because I'm really looking forward to showing that deck, and also showing, the normal ones and my mini ones that I basically take along wherever I go. So instead of binging and going and spending like yay hundreds of euros on decks, which is impossible for me because I have to, I have an expensive house and I've got all sorts of other issues going on that, we need the money for. And it's just, it's not a choice we make. We make the choice to go buy books or to go on trips or to buy crystals and things like that. That's also really important to us, to both of us. So the decks have never had this absolute type of a priority. However, I do see that there is one sort of an aspect that makes decks really, really appealing. And Natalia doesn't go into this aspect of the things because she's talking about the psychology of the behavior of basically trying to fill your own cup with things constantly, and which I find a very interesting thought, because I was doing that as well, and I'm basically also doing that when I'm doing my little cutting and pasting of my my little cards and things. It's only that what I am doing is more of a sort of a sideways or a tangential approach to this deck in question, or this set of images in question. I think one reason that we find these decks so irresistible, one basic reason, is that all oracles, whichever system you use, whether it's runes or Ogham, Lenormand, whichever type you use, the whole set of the given symbols, the set of images, or whatever it is that you have in your particular system, the set is meant to represent the world. So that's where I'm coming from with this. This is one of my kinds of thoughts that I have along these lines. So that's the secret, right? The secret to oracle, tarot, runes, and all the rest of it is that each system by itself contains the world. It contains enough elements that in some way or another, if you combine them, life comes out, basically. It's meant to be a complete representation of life for us, the way we experience it, or potentially a representation of our consciousness, even the way that works, or at whichever level you want to look at that, right? So I've always found this aspect to be really magical. I remember being interested in runes way back in the day, and being fascinated by the fact that here you have like this complete set of very small set, really, of 24 or however many you want to use symbols, just a little pile of those, And it looks like whatever crazy adventure you're in some type of a combination or other, it's going to be possible to find that story in there somehow. So, of course, that's why we have tower cards and devil cards and death cards, because otherwise it would be all wrong. Because life contains those, doesn't it? Just okay. So yeah. So that's one element, and I think that is like a key to my next step, which is more or less an answer to what Natalia was talking about. She said that we are trying, when we are binging, when we're basically buying all sorts of, or trying to incorporate into our lives all sorts of decks, that we're really trying to fill a hole in our soul. There's a desperate, almost, maybe even a really desperate need to understand more, to know more, to engage with our intuition, as she puts it, or to think about things in a more structured, possibly way, which of course is possible if you have a tool that is really flexible, that has parts, and all the parts put together represent the world and your life. So that will work, right? That will be an excellent way of, I think that's how that works, really, basically. So yes, that's just my 2 cents worth about that. But I've always been fascinated by that aspect of these tools of ours. So then it's the process, right, of you trying to find the perfect tool, as Natalia puts it. I will start painting if I have the perfect brush. I will start going deeper into myself if I have the perfect deck. And so there I had another kind of a side tangent going on for myself, where I see, for myself certainly, a discrepancy often between, I go to a tarot shop, for example, there's one in Amsterdam that I go visit once a year or so if I have the chance, and they have like this much, no, twice this much, I'm going like 2 meters wide here. It's 4 meters wide and the same number high, in height. Basically all tarot and some Lenormand and not the Oracle, because that's in the other department. And quite often I will stand there and look at many things and go away without buying anything, because in the flesh, none of it really appeals to me, so to speak, in the flesh. In the cardboard, it doesn't really appeal to me. It's like there is something really discouraging to me about this massive pile after pile after pile. They become interchangeable. Of course, it's a shop, so they're supposed to present as much of their merchandise as possible, right? So I'm going to try and shift the camera a bit, the phone, because I'm really staring into the sun right now. Just a second. Yay, so yes, that's much better, I think. I've still got spots on my face, but that's because of the branches with little buds out there that are in front of the sun, like so. So I tend to buy, occasionally I tend to buy something because I feel basically at some point or other it's like, okay, this is a really interesting approach. I actually have the money at that point, and so yeah, so I can use this, I think. And so for example, I bought these because they were really cheap. They were like €6.95 in euros. That's like €7. So how much is that in American money? 650, 750, something like that. The Nostradamus, cards of Nostradamus, it's really, basically, I think it's tarot, because I put them in order at one point and found out that there are very many similarities. I don't use this thing really because I've no real need for this type of message. It's very old world kind of. It's about moral and basically about ideals. So there's all these virtues and helpfulness, that one, and qualities, learning, conversation. I guess I find it a bit stiff to work with. Maybe I could, you can always use it. I have used it a few times and I found it really, really accessible. It wasn't that the reading that came out didn't make any sense, or that it was. Sometimes you can have that with a deck, that it really isn't your wavelength, and then the cards really go against you, right? Maybe you've noticed that. It certainly has happened with me. So it's not that I don't like it. I like the images. It's kind of, it's a different world, basically. The world that these images come from and the way they're described and the way that's given is really so, it's from a world that used to be a lot more predictable in many ways, I think. The challenges to your life in the world where these come from, I think that's actually the Seven of Cups fantasy here. The challenges to a person in those days were different, and so it doesn't really. I wouldn't give it away necessarily. I'll keep it, but I don't think I will necessarily want to use this. It's too quiet is something that comes to mind now. But I wouldn't have been able to find this out if I hadn't bought it and then, at home just messed around with it, as we tend to do, right? You have to first have it in order to be able to finally at the end decide, okay, so, nah, I'm not going to be able to give this a permanent place, not like the Sassurabita, which has an absolute permanent place in my life, right? So there's that. There's different levels of what you can use, when and where, and how formal. This is really formal, and it's a type of society that I've really not experienced myself. I can see that because I've studied enough of history and culture and stuff, and I am a European person to some extent, to the extent that Dutch people are actually Europeans. So, yeah, but I had to first own it in order to figure that out. So that was a relatively informed decision, I think, at some point, to basically stick it in my cupboard and just let it stand there. It's still pretty, it's still, it's okay, and maybe I will occasionally pull it out. And it's not that I have any bad vibes with it or any of it. It's just fine. So there are those practical considerations, right? To what extent is any pre-1900, pre-1850 even, deck culturally going to work for us now, when we are so used to having so much wilder imagery, so much more from nature, so much more photography, so much computer manipulated collage, so much more all kinds of things, To what extent is a pre-1900 deck going to fill the cup? I wouldn't know. There's an attractiveness to Marseille decks, to, what am I thinking of here? Basically, Tarot de Marseille, There's loads of different versions. Visconti Sforza. I have worked with my Visconti Sforza tarot. At first, for the first 6 months or so, that's all I had, and I enjoyed it immensely. But that was a different time in my life, and I have a really personal, deeply sort of resonating connection with that particular deck. And it was the first real tarot deck that came into my life after I, after not having worked with it for decades, basically. And because the Visconti Sforza is really beautifully drawn, it's very elegant. What I have is the Mary Packard edition. It's the aesthetics are absolutely relevant to me. However, nowadays I most of the time draw from one of two decks, I should say, that are on my living room table here. That are my decks that I go to at the moment. And they're really extremes, I think. One of them is the Grimaud Marseille, which is basically like a very simplified version of the Visconti Sforza. Really small, easy to use. I can do bigger spreads with that and combine it with other decks and things like that. So that's real easy. And I get nice readings from that. I get sufficiently meaty information and intel from that deck. The other deck that I use is the Voyager Tarot, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And the more I work with that, the more I appreciate it. But that deck has another completely different set of... how shall I put it? I had to do things to that deck. I had to trim it and edge it and paint over the paintings, the collage images, and so on and so forth, before I could use it, because of the immense contrast within the collage. It was hurting my eyes. So having done all that, I find I can look at the details on each card of the Voyager Tarot much more, and I find I have an intense satisfaction getting all that information out of this deck, and it's way more intuitive, I suppose. There are no predefined, or there are very little bits of predefined meaning. Basically, it's more like each card is a current going in this direction, going in that direction, and depending on the situation, I will interpret it this way or that way, or it's very free. It's way more free than any of the traditional decks, basically. So all that. I use the... Yes, Puss, I know you're there. I use the Sassarabita when I'm on the road. My husband will use the new Sassarabita when it gets here for himself. I'm so glad, because he basically kept insisting that we should get it. And it has this really personal but very clear and very, very definite personal imagery, right? So in all this, I'm not mentioning the Rider-Waite Smith at all, until now, that is. I have done my own personal version of made a set of cards recently. That's an Indonesian tarot. That is basically my first and probably only real Rider-Waite Smith tarot, as it is. And by now I think I'm ready because I've sort of waltzed around the outside edges of the tarot world, and I have been very interested in Kabbalah and done a lot of research on the historical backgrounds of the meanings and all that. So I know where it all kind of basically got an idea basically where it all comes from. And so now I'm comfortable actually also looking at the Rider-Waite, Six of Swords and Eight of Swords. I know where it comes from. I find it okay by now. I've always felt that it was my take on Rider-Waite is another theme for another video, I think. So yeah, so no binging as to Rider-Waite, certainly, which is, of course, if you don't binge on Rider-Waite and you don't binge on Tarot de Marseille because of the old style, or Renaissance decks or any of those, then you're not really often, at some point, it's not really binging anymore because there's only individual decks here and there. You know, there's hundreds still out there. But if you're excluding those big categories, there's a lot less room to binge, I think. So there's another practical thing. So basically what I wanted also to mention in this video, what's kind of been nagging at the back of my brain, which is also why I'm, still going on about this, is that one of the reasons we go for this endless dissatisfaction in terms of decks, right? In terms of tarot, and to a slightly lesser extent maybe in Oracle, is that we have this perfect deck in our minds, in our culture, certainly. All of us, I suppose, to some extent or other. I think we have a cultural image or emotion, even, in ourselves that is very old. That there is like a seed in all of us. That's my supposition here. So I'm shifting gear from the practical side of and all these different, ideas and things to a more maybe intuitive or, emotional side of things here. What I'm detecting is that we all have the seed inside us of an oracular system. And that's where it gets interesting to me personally. So, as if we had a collective memory, okay, for example, of certainly the situation where either you ask the cards yourself, you go to somebody who draws cards, or in whatever respect you witness somebody else drawing cards for somebody, that type of thing. It's like a little icon. It's a special image that has a special meaning for all of us. I think we are hugely attracted to this vibration of, here we have an actual physical tool, and there's behind the tool, immediately behind and around it, there's this huge field of comfort, certainly, and symbols and images that are suggesting meanings beyond themselves. So there's a huge depth there that keeps drawing us in. So one reason, very simple, I think, reason that we are never satisfied with the decks we can buy is, in my opinion, a very simple reason, is that you tend to buy your decks new. Because older or second-hand decks can be very yucky. Certainly vibrationally they can be very doubtful, because who knows what's happened to them, and or they may even be incomplete. So what you going to do with that then? However, there's people around that I've heard talk even on YouTube, in the Tarot Tube, who inherited a deck from a parent, for example, or a grandparent, and work with that deck quite a lot. And here we go again with this perfect image that we have, the perfect dream, the dream seed of the oracular system. If I work only with that deck, right? Only, I am going to suppose that I inherited a deck from my dad. Okay, let's just put it that way. No, not my dad, my granddad, because I had a really nice relationship with my granddad, and he wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole, but never mind, in real life. But let's imagine for a second that I inherited a deck from him, right? The moment I touch it, I become a part of his life. The moment I handle these cards or engage, it's a hypothesis. I don't have a deck that came from my granddad, but just to explain, what it is that I'm on about, basically, hopefully. The moment I work with that deck, I limit myself to the experiences that he had and the way he looked at them. So my focus goes in, which can be useful, but it can also be really limiting. And I don't want that. So personally, I think I have the greatest tarot collection in the world because I can make whatever I want if I just am willing to sacrifice 2 or 3 days sticking and gluing and messing with things to create backs and what have you. For more intel on that, see the other videos about that type of work, Lots of fun, but it takes a long, you have to basically make that happen for yourself. And yeah, it's something that suits my temperament really well, I suppose. So, but I think that what we are looking for in our binge, and I'm trying to come back to that, is we're looking for the seed. We are looking for a deck that in actual life will represent the ideal, the dream oracular system. And in each case, each and every single, whatever it is, this or runes or my witch's runes that I made myself that have a wonderful vibration that I really love. There's just 13 of those, just a handful of little pebbles with, the eye and the sun and the waves and whatever it was. It's like a mini version of a Lenormand, really. Like, I love those. They have a wonderful vibration. I was amazed, really, at how well they work for me. I don't use them enough, I think. I should get them back out, but maybe it's something that I tend to also. That particular one, I get out when the weather clears up, when it's not in the wintertime. I won't use my witch's runes in the wintertime. So there's that as well. But what I'm trying to say is all those different systems, each time they can only satisfy one narrow band. And the thing inside us, the oracular seed inside us, it doesn't have a definition. It's a very wide and very deep field. And you can touch on the field or live in the field in all sorts of other ways by exploring herbs, for example, and plants and magical properties and vibrational properties of plants and trees and all that. Exploring the qualities of crystals and doing a million other Wiccan and witchy activities, it's a really big seed, the seed of magic inside us. And I think that, so summarizing, maybe, hopefully, to, what I'm trying to say here is that the ideal deck that we have in mind is one that we have personally used. The longer you use an actual deck, the closer it will come to, the closer it will come to you. So it'll dig its little roots inside you, and you can dig your roots into it. And that's a very deep and personal process, and there's a lot can be said about that, which means that you have to take your time away from the other decks. Now that's nasty, right? So actually, my conclusion here, yowzer, is that binging is actually very counterproductive to the satisfaction of the desire and the need for the finding of the actual oracular seed. I didn't expect that one. I wasn't expecting that at all. But the more decks you have, the less time you get to spend with each one. That's what I'm trying to say here. Very many practical considerations. So I'm 34 minutes in. My throat is almost gone. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm still a bit hoarse. I love this tag. I'm still bubbling inside, like trying, okay, they can so many details and ideas and things. So thank you. Thank you for being here. See you next time. Bye bye for now.